welcome back to the Unapologetic Podcast. I'm Brandt Merritt, hosting solo for another episode while Jonathan Woodyard is off-site, but excited to have an amazing special guest with us this morning, fresh out of chapel, kind of the first time we've done a straight from the exit chapel speaker, but Andy Naselli, professor of systematic theology at Bethlehem College and Seminary, also lead pastor of Christ the King Church in Minnesota, and again, our most recent chapel speaker this morning, straight off the stage. Andy, thanks for joining us from the car, right off the stage.
It's my pleasure. I'm just on my way to the airport.
Yeah, we're had a pretty kind of whirlwind, I guess, 24 hours with us. You got to speak at an After Dark event last night, got to speak in chapel this morning. Do you normally kind of cram the schedule with this much stuff real quick?
I asked ahead of time, what are the windows when I should schedule to arrive and leave, and I made the windows, but evidently it was tighter than it needed to be.
Yeah, no, it was great. The After Dark last night, I guess both chapel today and After Dark, you hit a couple of topics that are, carry a lot of weight, I think, for anyone, in particular for our college students. You talked about predestination. For the most part last night, there were some questions that hit a couple different topics, and then talked about anxiety this morning in chapel. So thanks for, not shying away. Not that I would expect you to shy away from heavy topics, but thank you for bringing a good word on a couple of deep things for us. How did your visit from your end go? Did you enjoy interacting with the students and getting to connect with SBU?
Yes, sir. It was a pleasure.
That's
the
great.
Only regret is that my friend Jonathan Woodyard wasn't here.
That's right. I think he probably regrets it quite a bit as well. So last night on Predestination, I want to talk about that. And you were referencing your book on predestination, went through a lot of the topics with the chapters, gave a great, I thought, summary comparison between Calvinism and Arminianism, which was very helpful for, I'm sure, our students, but even me, just to kind of get a good refresher and hear your perspective on it. A question I had that you kind of touched on last night, but I don't know that anyone asked it in this way. Why does it matter to think through these? If you're talking to somebody who just isn't well versed in it, or they hear some of the back and forth, the debate from theology, and not just Calvinism and Arminianism, but any of the worldviews or theological lenses that people might look through. I think a criticism that someone could bring, not my criticism, I know why this matters, but someone say, well, shouldn't we just focus on loving Jesus and loving others, and these big theological debates aren't that important? So how would you answer that question of, why is it important to think through these things and come up with a perspective on it?
Well, if we took the viewpoint it doesn't matter, then we're disrespecting God, because God thought it matters, because he told us about it. He revealed anything that God reveals about himself matters. And if we disregard any of his words as unimportant, we're being arrogant and not trembling at his words like we should. So the question is not, is predestination a thing? It is. That word's in the Bible. It's a concept. So the question is, what does it mean? So to study what it means is just to take God's words seriously. And then you can ask, well, all right, why does it matter if you get it right or wrong? Well, it can affect how you think about reality. Are you thinking about it correctly or not? And the better you understand this reality, the deeper your praise of God will be.
Let me kind of double tap on it, then we can keep going. So when I thought a good question last night from a student was on missions, and the Calvin, which is always a good question. And when you talk about Calvinism, why would Calvinists care about missions if we think it's all preordained anyway? And you gave a great answer about walking through the graveyard, and it doesn't matter how loud you yell, it's not going to make somebody wake up out of the grave anymore. It's only God's work that does it. So is missions maybe one of the clearer places where you can speak to why it matters, or are there other parts of the Christian life where you think Calvinism is really important for someone to have that framework?
Oh, it's more than missions. It's how you think about the whole Christian life, how you think about prayer, progressive sanctification, church ministry, your whole discipleship program for a church, what does it mean to make disciples? If your mindset is that all the weight's on my shoulders to use the right methods and such to accomplish the ends, that's a weight that I couldn't bear. But if it's more, I'm trusting the Lord to do his work through his Spirit and his word, my job is to be faithful and for God to produce the fruit. That's so freeing. But that means that we need to be faithful to what God has said. That's why we pray. That's why we give. That's why we go. That's why we evangelize. We do all that trusting that God will use that as means to accomplish his end. If God has ordained the end, he has also ordained the means to that end. So we're on the way to the airport right now. If God has ordained for me to get safely to the airport, then he has ordained the means, which is this guy, Taylor, driving. He's putting his foot down on the gas pedal, and he's got his hands on the wheel, and his eyes are open, and he's actively driving. But you say, well, didn't God ordain that you'd get to the airport? If we end up getting there, he did. And he also ordained the means to that end. So if God ordained the end of electing certain people, the means to that end include proclaiming the gospel, praying for unbelievers, and seeing God work through his word and spirit to regenerate people.
Yeah. It sounded like, as you were talking last night, your story is a little similar to mine in the timing piece, I guess, of coming to really think through these questions deeply. It was college, late teens, early 20s for me. And we were kind of joking last night, like our students are all talking about this. Like it's very much a topic that, especially on a Christian campus, is pervasive. What do you think it is about that window, late high school, late teens, early 20s, that this sort of does become something that students wrestle with, that believers wrestle with? Because it seems to be kind of a common thread that this is a time frame that it raises to the top.
Yeah, I would go back to Dorothy Sayers' analysis for how children develop and how they go through different stages, and what is the most fitting way to train children at different stages. When people are moving from childhood to adulthood, they are crystallizing, systematically thinking about the way things are. And this particular topic is one of those big ones where they're trying to make sense at a macro level, the 10,000 or 30,000 foot view. And for some people in the college years, this is the first time they've actually tried to do that. Now, sometimes it happens to folks in their high school years or their graduate school years, but college, I think, is normal, the most normal time.
Yeah, for sure. On the chapel's message today, you spoke on anxiety, gave 9 reasons out of Matthew when Jesus says, why we shouldn't worry, why we shouldn't have anxiety. And in particular, how you framed it, we shouldn't have sinful anxiety. You started off like there are, ways you can be worried about something that's not sinful anxiety, of the right category. But framing things under that banner of sinful anxiety, it's one of the first times I've heard it framed that way. And so I thought it's very helpful for people to understand the weight of not taking this seriously. So when did anxiety for you of a topic and this message, is it something you've preached a lot back home? Is it something that's become more something you've talked about as cultures maybe become anxiety's become more of a topic within culture?
Yeah, I think I prepared this first when I teach regularly at the Master's Seminary in Los Angeles, where John MacArthur was for so many years. And They asked me to address the college students on this topic. They were spending a whole summer on anxiety. And they're reading Abigail Schreier's book. It came out a few years ago about this. I think it's called The Anxious Generation. And it seems like right now, young people are more anxious than they used to be. So that's why I was studying it in some depth. I've also, just as a pastor, talked to people frequently who struggle with sinful anxiety in particular areas. And it's an evergreen sin. And Jesus's words about it in Matthew 6:24-34 are perennially relevant and so helpful. You may have noticed at the beginning of my sermon, I asked, do we need something outside the Bible to really deal with anxiety? And there's a whole debate in the modern biblical counseling movement about this. And I strongly believe that the Bible's enough. We don't need
Yeah.
experts in trauma or experts in psychobabble to help us figure out what to do. God, the Creator, made us, and He's told us what to do, and I think we should listen to Him carefully.
I thought you can push back if you think I'm not reading this right, but the points 7 and 8, when you talked about um, disrespecting that God knows what we need. The Father knows what we need, and then point 8, if we're not seeking Him first, then that's not where we're receiving what we need. We have to first seek Him. Like, to me, those were, of the 9, probably the most Christian embedded. Some of the stuff of don't worry about tomorrow. There are worldly processes that people go through of, like, it's not beneficial to worry about tomorrow. Let's focus on just today, just the task ahead of you. There's plenty of work and study around not putting money as the thing you're most worried about. There are other things more important than money. But those 2 points about the uniquely Christian piece of, you have a Father, we have a Creator who is going to provide for our needs. If we seek Him first, we're not seeking some other source of support. Seeking Him first, to me, felt like the most uniquely Christian things that we really have to spend a lot of time thinking about, which you did. I think you unpacked those maybe even more than the other points. Is that maybe a fair way to look at it? Is there another way you would think about that?
So I haven't thought about this before. That's an interesting question. So when Jesus says you can't serve 2 masters at the same time, that seems to me like a pretty Christian framing. But maybe you're saying like a Buddhist or like you're saying other worldviews hear that reason and adapt it, and it would make sense to them. Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah. If you're trying to think of how does the Christian worldview uniquely draw someone who's wrestling with anxiety, or trying to think through, is anxiety something that I have to view as sinful? Some of those other points, I think other worldviews or religions could maybe speak to, whereas opposed to 7 and 8 couldn't. But again, I don't know. It's the first time I've really unpacked your message in that way, and there's just a couple of notes that I wrote on it.
Just to affirm what you're saying, all of the other reasons that Jesus gives that I unpacked, I give 9 reasons. So those other 7 reasons are true. They're proverbially true.
Right.
And Jesus Himself taught them, which makes them Christian teachings,
Yes.
and universally acknowledged by people of different worldviews. That doesn't make them less true, but you're saying 2 of those reasons in particular are uniquely Christian. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that was a takeaway I had. Yeah, it was just kind of a thought as I was listening to you, like, how would I, maybe if I'm talking to, like, some of our students last night asking about predestination, if you're talking to another believer or an unbeliever and trying to walk them through this, like, well, hey, I read another book about, why I shouldn't put money as important, or shouldn't worry about the future as much. Obviously all this is in the Bible. It's God's truth, and we could, to your point, the Bible is sufficient because it covers all of these things, and not anything else covers all these things. So yeah, that was just my thought on it. It was just an interesting takeaway I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
So kind of on that, with college students, and you've got a kid in college and kids in school. I've got a 13-year-old and a almost 11-year-old. We're working with college students. What are the things that encourage you about this generation? And then what are some things that maybe give you pause or concern for them? And I'd just be curious for your broad brush on those 2 questions.
Yeah, I'm exposed to some of the best of this generation. So I'm encouraged by the ones I know who are eager to read the very best literature. So in high school and even before that, reading great books and wanting to go back to the sources and understand the greatest literature in light of the greatest book. I love that mindset. I'm thinking of some of my daughters who are kind of rebelling a little bit against all of the technology and wanting print books and print everything, and old school. Some of them like to think typewriters and record players are cool. Like they're almost rebelling against like all the technology that came about as we were growing up, thinking, wow, this is amazing. So that there's that. That's being. I'm encouraged by people who just want to know what's true and go back to the basics. But that's unusual. Most of the young people today have been sucked into the vortex of, you know, if you thought that moving from books to radio was bad and moving from radio to television was bad, I mean, we've moved from that to like little social media short videos that people scroll through and they change their video every 30 seconds or whatever. The mindset, the attention span is grossly shorter than it used to be.
Yeah.
I'm all about reading books, and it's hard enough to get some people to watch a whole video now. Like
Yeah.
people, if they watch movies, they have to have their phone up and be texting and doing stuff through the movie. So the ability to think for long periods of time deeply is a sort of a muscle that you develop. And historically, people have developed that from their youngest years in the process of enculturation, education. And the people who now come to our colleges and seminaries are not nearly as equipped intellectually as they used to be 20, 40, 100 years ago. I was looking at an entrance exam recently to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary from like the late 1800s. And it was for New Testament Greek. And I don't think that most advanced Greek students in seminary could pass that. And that was the entrance exam. I was reading a book recently called Why Johnny Can't Preach, and by T. David Gordon. And he wrote this in the early 2000s. And he said that a modern day first-year graduate student in a seminary has the equivalent of a sixth grader, I think, from the 1950s. So I'm not trying to be gloom and doom. I'm saying our standards have slipped. So,
yeah. I just finished Deep Work by Cal Newport, one of the books I just read in the last few months. And that idea of it being a muscle that we're just not training anymore. And there's no expectation for people to train it because everything has changed in how we teach, how the workplace has changed, what we expect of everyone, but how much value there is in still being able to do that, how it can really set you apart, and should be something that people pursue. So yeah, I resonate with that quite a bit.
Sorry. The resurgence, not resurgence, but the surgence of artificial intelligence is really changing the landscape right now. And we've got a lot of students who are kind of riding the crest of this first wave and realizing that they can get through school with relatively little work by using artificial intelligence. And professors right now are scrambling to figure out, do we change our assignments? What do we do? How do we respond to this? I just wrote a little book called How to Write a Paper, and I have an appendix in there on artificial intelligence and writing papers, because I'm arguing there, artificial intelligence can write a paper that's decent and passable, but that's a muscle. That process of paper writing is a muscle building process we don't want to lose. So I'm requiring my students, you may not use artificial intelligence for ideating and generating content. You can use it to discover content and use it to suggest, copy editing improvements, but for nothing ideating and generating. It'd be like saying, why should I go bench press weight? A machine can bench press the weight for me. Well, that defeats the purpose of the whole thing. Yeah. So that we're at a spot right now where we want to use tools responsibly. I'm not saying don't use AI ever, but I feel like when the iPhone first came out, I think it was 2007 or 8, we didn't know what this thing was going to do to transform how we live. AI, I think, is like that, but way more. And we're at the early crest of this, and just figuring out what to do.
Yeah. Well, you'll be one of the people I know I keep tabs on how to think through that, because I know you're spending a lot of time with it. So thanks for all the work you're doing there, and thank you for again being on campus. I know you're trying to catch a flight, so safe travels back home, and hopefully get to connect with you again soon. I'm sure we'll cross paths either at SBC or something in the future, CrossCon or TGC, one of those. Hopefully I'll see you there. All right. Thanks, Andy. And Jonathan will be back pretty soon. We'll have co-host again, so look forward to some future episodes. And thanks again for Andy Naselli joining us today.